If you're gonna stand around looking useless, grab a mop and make yourself useful. The words cracked across the marble lobby so sharply that even the rolling suitcase near the revolving doors seemed to stop moving for a second. Several guests glanced over their shoulders. A bellhop froze beside a luggage cart. Behind the front desk, two receptionists lowered their eyes immediately, pretending to focus on their monitors. Derek Whitmore stood near the center fountain with one polished shoe slightly forward, his expensive gray suit fitting him like armor. In his hand, he held a mop handle, extending it toward the tall black man standing quietly near the elevators. Nathaniel Brooks looked older than the rest of the staff, maybe early 40s, broad-shouldered, calm-faced, dressed in a dark work jacket with rainwater still clinging to the fabric. His boots carried the dust of travel. His watch looked worn. Nothing about him suggested power. Nothing about him suggested ownership. Derek smirked as a few nervous chuckles spread through the lobby. "Well," he said loudly. "You deaf too?" Nathaniel glanced down at the mop handle. For a long moment, he said absolutely nothing. The massive chandelier overhead reflected soft gold light across the polished floors, and somewhere behind the lounge bar, glasses clinked faintly against one another. Then Nathaniel reached forward and calmly took the mop from Derek's hand. That surprised people more than if he had argued. Derek gave a satisfied nod, already turning away like the moment was beneath him now that he had won it. "Floor near the east entrance," he said without looking back. "Somebody spilled coffee 10 minutes ago." Nathaniel simply nodded once. No anger. No embarrassment. Just quiet acceptance. The younger employees watched him carefully as he walked across the lobby pushing the mop bucket beside him. The wheels squeaked softly against the marble. One housekeeper standing near the hallway lowered her voice toward another employee. "That's messed up," she whispered. "Shoo," the other replied immediately. "Derek hears everything." Nathaniel reached the spill near the entrance where cold rain tapped steadily against the tall glass windows facing Lexington Avenue. He rolled up the sleeves of his jacket slowly and began mopping the dark coffee stain with careful, steady movements. Outside, yellow taxi lights slid through the wet Manhattan streets like reflections drifting across black water. Inside, the luxury hotel smelled faintly of polished wood, citrus cleaner, and expensive perfume. A little girl walking beside her mother accidentally bumped the edge of the bucket. "Sorry," she whispered nervously. Nathaniel offered her a small smile. "You're okay," he said gently. The mother pulled the child closer while glancing apologetically toward him, assuming he was part of the cleaning crew. Nathaniel kept working silently. Across the lobby, Derek laughed with two executives near the concierge desk, completely unaware that several members of the hotel staff had started watching Nathaniel differently now. Not because he was mopping the floor, but because of the strange calmness in his face while doing it. As though none of this embarrassed him at all. As though he had already seen something nobody else inside that building could yet understand. The rain outside grew heavier as the afternoon crowd filled the lobby with the soft hum of expensive conversations and rolling luggage wheels. Nathaniel Brooks continued moving the mop slowly across the marble floor, his movement steady, almost thoughtful, while the reflection of the chandelier rippled beneath the water streaks he cleaned away. Most people never looked directly at hotel workers. They looked through them. Nathaniel understood that better than anyone in the building. Near the concierge desk, Derek Whitmore adjusted the cuffs of his tailored shirt while speaking sharply into a wireless headset. "I do not care if the flowers arrived late. Figure it out before the investors get here." His voice carried across the lobby like a warning siren. A young valet hurried past holding car keys with trembling hands. "Sorry, sir," the young man muttered after nearly brushing Derek's shoulder. Derek did not even slow down. "You should be," he snapped coldly. Nathaniel watched quietly from across the room without changing expression. There was something almost unsettling about how calm he remained while observing everything around him. Not curious. Not judgmental. Just aware. He noticed the exhausted bartender rubbing her wrist behind the lounge counter after a 10-hour shift. He noticed the pregnant housekeeper carrying 2 overflowing linen bags without help. He noticed the fear in the eyes of the interns every time Derek walked near them. And more than anything, he noticed how silence had become normal inside the hotel. Nobody complained out loud anymore. They simply endured. A server accidentally dropped a spoon near the cafe entrance, and the sharp metallic sound echoed briefly through the marble lobby. Derek turned instantly. "Do you people enjoy embarrassing this hotel?" he barked. The young server flushed bright red while bending to pick it up. "No, sir." "Then act like professionals." Nathaniel slowly wrung out the mop beside the fountain. Water dripped softly back into the bucket while he studied Derek from a distance. One of the older bellmen approached Nathaniel carefully a few moments later. His silver name tag read Leonard. "You new here?" Leonard asked quietly. Nathaniel nodded once. "Just passing through." Leonard gave a tired laugh under his breath. "Bad day to pass through." Nathaniel glanced toward Derek. "He always like that?" Leonard hesitated before answering. "Only when people are breathing." Nathaniel almost smiled at that. Almost. The elevator doors opened nearby, releasing a group of wealthy guests wrapped in dark cashmere coats while cold air swept briefly through the lobby. Nathaniel stepped aside politely to let them pass. One businessman looked at him for half a second before handing him an empty coffee cup without a word, assuming he worked maintenance. Nathaniel accepted it calmly and tossed it into a nearby trash can. Leonard watched the exchange carefully. "Does that not bother you?" he asked quietly. Nathaniel rested both hands on the mop handle for a moment. "People tell you who they are very quickly when they think you are beneath them," he replied softly. Leonard stared at him differently after that. Across the room, Derek suddenly snapped his fingers toward a frightened intern carrying folders near the front desk. "Move faster," he ordered. The young woman nearly dropped the paperwork trying to obey him. Nathaniel's eyes followed her as she disappeared into the back hallway. The lights overhead reflected softly against the polished floor beneath his boots while thunder rolled faintly outside the Manhattan skyline. Somewhere deep inside the hotel, hidden beneath the luxury and gold-trimmed walls, tension sat like a living thing waiting for the moment it would finally break. By 6:30 that evening, the storm outside had turned the glass walls of the hotel into sheets of moving silver. Inside, the grand lobby glowed warm beneath crystal chandeliers while soft piano music drifted from hidden speakers overhead, elegant enough to make guests forget how tense the staff felt underneath the polished smiles. Nathaniel Brooks pushed the mop bucket slowly toward the service hallway after finishing the main entrance. The wheels rattled softly across the tile before reaching thick carpet where the sound disappeared completely. As he passed the employee break room, he noticed the young intern from earlier sitting alone beside the vending machines with her face lowered into her hands. Her conference badge hung crooked against her blazer. Nathaniel paused near the doorway. "Long day?" he asked gently. The young woman looked up quickly, embarrassed someone had noticed her crying. "I am fine," she said automatically. Nathaniel leaned the mop against the wall beside him. "Most people who are fine do not hide in break rooms." That earned the smallest laugh from her. She wiped beneath her eyes carefully before speaking again. "Derek said if I mess up tonight's investor packets one more time, I should start looking for another career." Nathaniel nodded slowly, listening without interruption. "You new here?" he asked. 3 months. And already scared to breathe?" Her expression faltered because it was true. Nathaniel glanced through the small glass window toward the glowing lobby outside. "Bad leaders think fear creates excellence," he said quietly. "It only creates silence." The intern stared at him for a moment as though surprised. Someone finally understood what everyone else ignored. Before she could respond, Derek's voice exploded from the hallway. "There you are." Both of them straightened instantly. Derek marched toward the doorway holding a stack of folders beneath one arm, irritation practically radiating from his face. "Why are these investor reports still not alphabetized?" he snapped toward the intern. "I told you 40 minutes ago." "I was fixing the print error in section 4, she answered nervously. Derek let out a cold laugh. "Amazing. Every day you somehow discover a new way to slow everybody down." Nathaniel watched quietly beside the mop bucket while the intern lowered her eyes again. Derek finally noticed him standing there. "And what are you doing?" he demanded. "Break room conversations are not part of janitorial duties." Nathaniel answered calmly. She looked upset. Derek shook his head with open disgust. "This is exactly why people never move up in life. Everybody wants feelings and conversations instead of results." The intern's face tightened with humiliation. Nathaniel studied Derek silently for a long moment. The fluorescent lights overhead reflected sharply against the polished floor while distant thunder rolled somewhere above the city skyline. "Results matter," Nathaniel said quietly. "So do people." Derek smirked immediately. "You giving management advice now?" Nathaniel did not answer right away. Instead, he reached down and adjusted the mop bucket handle that had slipped sideways. The small gesture somehow irritated Derek even more because it felt calm. Controlled. Unbothered. "You know what your problem is?" Derek said. "People like you think being nice is leadership." Nathaniel slowly looked back up at him. "No," he replied softly. "People like me know respect costs nothing." For 1 second, absolute silence filled the hallway. Even the intern stopped breathing. Derek's expression hardened instantly. He stepped closer, lowering his voice into something colder now. "You should worry less about leadership philosophies and more about cleaning floors." Nathaniel simply nodded once, picked up the mop handle again, and rolled the bucket back toward the lobby. While the intern watched him leave with confusion written all across her face. Because somehow, the man pushing a mop through the luxury hotel carried himself with more authority than the manager screaming orders inside it. The lobby grew even busier as night settled over Manhattan. Rain streaked down the towering glass windows while luxury sedans lined the curb outside beneath pools of yellow streetlight. Inside the hotel, staff moved faster now, carrying silver trays, adjusting flower arrangements, checking reservations for the investor dinner beginning upstairs in less than an hour. Nathaniel Brooks pushed the mop bucket slowly past the concierge desk when he noticed a loud crash near the cocktail lounge entrance. A young bellboy named Marcus stood frozen beside shattered glass and a puddle of sparkling water spreading across the marble floor. One of the hotel guests had stepped away angrily, muttering beneath his breath while water dripped from the edge of his expensive leather shoes. Marcus looked barely 19. His hands shook as he bent down quickly. "I am sorry," he kept repeating softly. "I am really sorry." Before Nathaniel could move, Derek Whitmore appeared almost instantly like he had been waiting for another mistake to punish. "Unbelievable," Derek snapped loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "You cannot even carry a tray across 10 feet of floor without embarrassing this hotel." Marcus lowered his head further. "The glass slipped, sir." "No," Derek replied sharply. "Carelessness slipped." Several guests glanced awkwardly toward the scene before pretending not to notice. Nathaniel stepped closer without speaking and quietly parked the mop bucket beside the spill. Marcus immediately knelt to start picking up broken glass with trembling fingers. Nathaniel gently stopped him with one hand. "Easy," he said calmly. "You will cut yourself rushing." Derek scoffed loudly. "Wonderful. Now the janitor is coaching the Bell staff." Nathaniel ignored the comment completely. He grabbed a thick towel from the side of the bucket and carefully laid it over the larger glass pieces before crouching beside Marcus. "Take a breath first," he said quietly. Marcus swallowed hard and nodded. Nathaniel handed him the broom instead. "Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast." Marcus stared at him for half a second before beginning again, this time calmer. Derek folded his arms with visible irritation. "This is not group therapy," he muttered. Nathaniel continued cleaning the floor without looking up. "People make mistakes." Derek gave a dry laugh. "Successful people do not." That finally made Nathaniel pause. The marble floor reflected soft gold light beneath him while fragments of broken glass shimmered near the towel like scattered ice. Slowly, he stood back up holding the broom handle loosely in one hand. "No," Nathaniel said quietly. "Successful people learn how to respond when mistakes happen." Derek's jaw tightened instantly. "You always this talkative?" Nathaniel met his eyes calmly. "Only when somebody is being humiliated for no reason." The temperature in the lobby seemed to drop around them. Marcus froze beside the mop bucket while nearby staff suddenly found reasons to look elsewhere. Derek stepped forward slightly, lowering his voice into something sharp enough to cut through marble. "You think because you can push a mop around quietly you suddenly understand management?" Nathaniel held his gaze without flinching. "I think fear makes people nervous," he replied softly. "Nervous people make more mistakes." For one dangerous second, Derek looked ready to explode. But several investors had just entered through the revolving doors behind him, and the manager instantly forced a polished smile across his face instead. The transformation happened so quickly it almost looked unnatural. "Clean this up," Derek ordered coldly before walking toward the arriving guests with his hand already extended for greetings. Nathaniel watched him go in silence. Beside him, Marcus finally exhaled shakily. "Thank you," the young bellboy whispered. Nathaniel picked up the mop again and slowly cleaned the last of the spilled water from the marble floor. "Do not thank me," he said quietly. "Just remember this feeling if you ever end up managing people yourself someday." By 8:05, the investor dinner upstairs had officially begun, and the entire hotel seemed to tighten beneath the pressure of serving powerful people perfectly. Crystal glasses reflected candlelight across the ballroom while soft jazz floated through hidden speakers above tables dressed in white linen and silver centerpieces. Downstairs, the main lobby remained busy with arriving guests and executives moving in and out beneath the glow of the chandelier. Nathaniel Brooks stood near the service hallway quietly replacing the dirty water inside his mop bucket when he noticed a commotion near the private executive lounge across from the elevators. Two hotel employees were whispering nervously beside the entrance while Derek Whitmore stormed toward the area adjusting the cuffs of his jacket again. "Where is security?" Derek snapped. "Who let somebody in there without authorization?" Nathaniel glanced toward the lounge entrance. The room beyond the glass doors glowed warm and quiet, furnished with leather chairs, dark walnut tables, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the rainy Manhattan skyline. It was reserved for board members, investors, and senior executives only. Nathaniel calmly rolled the mop bucket toward the hallway outside the lounge and parked it near the wall before stepping inside. He moved slowly, almost casually, and sat down in one of the empty leather chairs near the window overlooking Lexington Avenue. Rain slid down the glass in silver rivers while headlights drifted far below like floating embers. For the first time all evening, Nathaniel allowed himself a moment of stillness. His shoulders relaxed slightly. He folded his hands together and quietly watched the city below. Then Derek arrived. "You have got to be kidding me." The anger in his voice instantly silenced the nearby employees. Derek stepped into the lounge with disbelief written across his face as though he had just discovered something offensive contaminating the room itself. "Do you know where you are?" he demanded loudly. Nathaniel looked toward him calmly. "Yes." Derek laughed sharply under his breath. "No, I do not think you do." Several investors passing nearby slowed slightly, sensing tension in the air. Nathaniel remained seated. "This lounge is restricted," Derek continued coldly. "Executives only." Nathaniel glanced around the nearly empty room. "Looks quiet enough." That answer only made Derek angrier. He stepped forward and grabbed the visitor badge hanging from Nathaniel's jacket. "People like you always mistake kindness for permission," he muttered before ripping the badge free. The plastic clip snapped loudly in the silent lounge. Outside the glass walls, thunder rolled across the city skyline. Nathaniel slowly stood to his feet. Not defensive. Not afraid. Just calm. The difference unsettled everyone watching. Derek held the torn badge in one hand while lowering his voice into something dangerously humiliating now. "You mop floors here. That does not make you important." Nathaniel looked directly into his eyes. "No," he replied quietly. "How people treat others does." Derek scoffed immediately. "Do not start preaching to me. I am not preaching." Nathaniel's voice stayed soft, almost tired now. "I am observing." The silence afterward felt heavy enough to crack glass. Employees standing outside the lounge entrance pretended not to stare, but nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Rain hammered softly against the windows while the city lights shimmered across the polished floor beneath Nathaniel's boots. Derek pointed sharply toward the exit. "Get out of this lounge before I personally escort you downstairs." Nathaniel studied him for one long second. There was no anger in his face. Somehow that made the moment worse. Then slowly, Nathaniel reached into the inside pocket of his worn jacket. Derek straightened instantly, expecting an argument, maybe paperwork, maybe another excuse. Instead, Nathaniel simply removed a small black leather notebook and placed it calmly on the walnut table beside him. Derek frowned. "What is that supposed to mean?" Nathaniel looked toward the rain-covered skyline again before answering quietly. "Nothing," he said. "Not yet." The executive lounge fell into an uneasy silence after Nathaniel Brooks placed the small black leather notebook onto the walnut table. Nobody seemed to understand why such a simple gesture suddenly changed the atmosphere inside the room. Rain continued, sliding down the massive windows overlooking Manhattan while distant thunder rolled softly beyond the skyline. Derek Whitmore folded his arms tightly across his chest, trying to regain control of the moment. "You think carrying around a notebook makes you important?" he asked coldly. Nathaniel did not answer immediately. Instead, he rested one hand lightly against the back of the leather chair beside him and looked out toward the city lights glowing beneath the storm clouds. Yellow taxis crawled through wet streets 30 floors below while reflections shimmered across the glass like fractured gold. "No," Nathaniel finally said quietly. "But writing things down helps people remember what they saw." Derek frowned. "What exactly is that supposed to mean?" Nathaniel slowly opened the notebook. Several handwritten pages filled with neat observations covered the paper beneath the soft amber light of the lounge. Dates. Employee names. Notes. Times. Patterns. Derek's expression shifted slightly, though he still tried to hide it. Nathaniel flipped one page calmly. "Marcus Rivera," he read softly. "Bell staff. Apologized 6 times for dropping a tray while visibly shaking." Another page turned. "Emily Carter. Intern. Crying in employee break room after being threatened with termination over printer errors." Another page. "Housekeeping staff skipping meal breaks to avoid verbal humiliation during shift changes." The room grew colder with every word. Derek's jaw tightened instantly. "You spying on employees now?" Nathaniel looked up calmly. "No. Listening to them." Outside the lounge entrance, 2 receptionists stood frozen beside the hallway pretending to organize paperwork while secretly hearing every word. Nathaniel closed the notebook gently. Most people speak eventually when they believe nobody powerful cares enough to hear them. Derek forced out a dry laugh, but this time it sounded strained. "You have been here one day. Long enough." That answer lingered heavily in the air. Nathaniel walked slowly toward the rain-covered windows, his reflection stretching across the polished floor beneath him. The city beyond looked cold and distant now, blurred behind moving silver water. Do you know what every employee in this hotel has in common? Nathaniel asked quietly without turning around. Derek rolled his eyes impatiently. I am sure you are about to tell me. Nathaniel rested one hand lightly against the glass. They are afraid of disappointing you more than they are motivated to succeed. Derek scoffed again. Fear keeps standards high. Nathaniel shook his head once. Fear keeps people silent. For several seconds, nobody moved. The lounge lights reflected warmly against dark wood and leather while soft jazz drifted faintly from somewhere downstairs below the tension. Then Nathaniel spoke again, his voice quieter now. I watched a pregnant housekeeper carry 2 linen bags alone because she was scared to ask for help. Derek's expression flickered briefly. I watched an intern apologize for breathing too slowly. Another pause. I watched employees physically relax when you left the room. The silence afterward felt unbearable. Even the rain seemed louder now against the glass walls surrounding them. Derek stepped closer, lowering his voice carefully. You do not know the pressure of running a place like this. Nathaniel finally turned back toward him. Calm eyes. Tired eyes. Eyes that had clearly seen far more than they revealed. Actually, he replied softly, I know exactly how much pressure comes with leadership. Derek opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, the elevator at the far end of the hallway chimed softly outside the lounge doors. Several footsteps approached at once. Confident. Measured. Important. Nathaniel glanced toward the sound without changing expression at all. But for the first time all night, something inside the hotel began to shift. The elevator doors slid open with a soft metallic whisper that somehow sounded louder than Derek Whitmore's voice had all night. 3 people stepped out into the hallway outside the executive lounge. A gray-haired woman in a navy suit walked first, followed by 2 sharply dressed men carrying leather portfolios beneath their arms. Every employee nearby straightened instantly the moment they recognized them. Members of the board. Derek's posture changed. At once. His shoulders lifted. His expression softened into the polished corporate smile he reserved for powerful people. Good evening, he said smoothly while stepping toward them. Welcome back to the Lexington Grand. But the woman leading the group barely acknowledged him. Her eyes had already shifted past Derek and settled directly on Nathaniel Brooks standing quietly beside the rain-covered windows. The moment she saw him, her entire expression changed. Mr. Brooks, she said immediately. We have been looking everywhere for you. Silence crashed through the lounge. Derek's smile froze. One of the men beside her gave a relieved exhale. The board meeting is ready upstairs, sir, he added respectfully. Nathaniel nodded once. Calm. Unhurried. Like nothing about the moment surprised him at all. Derek blinked rapidly, trying to process what he had just heard. Wait, he said quietly. Nobody looked at him. The gray-haired woman stepped fully into the lounge now, her heels clicking softly across the polished floor. We were worried the flight delays might have kept you in Chicago overnight, she continued. The investors have all arrived. Nathaniel reached calmly for the small black notebook resting on the walnut table and slipped it back into his jacket pocket. Weather cleared faster than expected, he replied softly. His voice carried differently now. Not louder. Just undeniable. Derek stared at him as color slowly drained from his face. The rain outside continued streaking down the windows while distant thunder rolled beyond the skyline, but inside the lounge everything had gone completely still. Marcus stood frozen near the hallway entrance holding a tray against his chest. The intern from earlier covered her mouth with one trembling hand. Leonard the bellman slowly lowered his eyes as realization settled over him piece by piece. Nathaniel Brooks turned toward Derek calmly. No anger. No triumph. Somehow that made it worse. You, Derek swallowed hard. You are, one of the board members looked confused by the question. You do know who this is, correct? He asked carefully. Derek's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Nathaniel spared him from answering. Nathaniel Brooks, he said quietly. Chief Executive Officer. The silence afterward felt enormous. Somewhere downstairs, a piano continued playing softly in the ballroom, completely unaware that the atmosphere inside the hotel had just changed forever. Derek's breathing became visibly uneven now. His eyes dropped briefly toward the mop bucket still sitting near the hallway wall outside the lounge. Then toward the torn visitor badge still crushed inside his own hand. The memory of every word he had spoken that evening seemed to hit him all at once. Nathaniel walked slowly toward the lounge entrance while employees instinctively stepped aside for him. But before leaving, he paused beside Derek one final time. Interesting thing about leadership, Nathaniel said quietly. The people at the top are usually the ones paying closest attention to how everybody gets treated at the bottom. Derek looked physically ill now. His polished confidence had completely vanished, replaced by something raw. Fear. Shame. Realization. Nathaniel studied him silently for one long second before continuing toward the elevators with the board members beside him. As the doors opened again, every employee standing nearby instinctively straightened their posture. Nathaniel stepped inside calmly, his reflection glowing softly beneath the elevator lights while rain shimmered across the glass walls behind him. Just before the doors closed, his eyes shifted briefly toward Marcus and the others still frozen in the hallway. He gave the smallest nod imaginable. Then the elevator doors slid shut, leaving behind absolute silence and one manager standing motionless beside a forgotten mop bucket. For nearly 20 minutes after the elevator doors closed, nobody inside the executive lounge moved normally. The air itself felt different now, heavy with the kind of silence that follows public humiliation. Derek Whitmore remained standing beside the hallway entrance with the torn visitor badge still clenched in his hand. The polished confidence that usually defined him had completely disappeared. Across the lobby, employees continued working, but quieter now. Slower. Every few seconds, someone glanced toward Derek before quickly looking away again. Marcus carried luggage through the revolving doors while trying not to stare. Emily stood near the concierge desk pretending to organize folders she had already sorted twice. Leonard polished the brass luggage cart in slow circles without actually cleaning anything. Nobody knew what would happen next. Upstairs, the board meeting continued behind closed doors while rain battered the windows overlooking Manhattan. The ballroom lights reflected gold against the storm clouds outside, soft and distant, almost unreal. At exactly 9:14, the private elevator opened once again. Nathaniel Brooks stepped out alone this time. His dark suit jacket rested neatly across one arm now, revealing crisp white sleeves rolled slightly at the wrists. He looked exactly the same as before, calm and composed, except now every employee in the building understood who they were standing near. Conversation stopped almost instantly when he crossed the lobby. Derek straightened immediately. Mr. Brooks, he said quickly, his voice uneven. Nathaniel stopped walking. Not angry. Not cold. Just patient. Derek swallowed hard before speaking again. I owe you an apology. Nathaniel studied him quietly while rain streaked the towering windows behind them. Do you? He asked softly. Derek blinked at the question. Of course I do. I did not know who you were. Nathaniel's expression changed almost imperceptibly then. Not offended. Disappointed. That, he replied calmly, is exactly the problem. The words landed harder than shouting ever could have. Derek's face drained again. Employees nearby stood frozen beneath the chandelier light, pretending not to listen while hearing every syllable. Nathaniel slowly stepped closer, lowering his voice enough that people had to lean subtly toward the silence to catch it. You believed a man pushing a mop deserved less respect than somebody wearing a suit. Derek immediately shook his head. No, sir, that is not what I meant. Is it not? Nathaniel asked gently. Derek opened his mouth, but no answer came. Nathaniel glanced toward the front desk where Emily stood nervously clutching folders against her chest. Then toward Marcus helping an elderly couple near the entrance. Then Leonard quietly holding the lobby door open for arriving guests despite his aching shoulders. This hotel survives because most guests never notice work themselves exhausted every single day, Nathaniel continued softly. Housekeepers. Bell staff. Dishwashers. Valets. Servers. Maintenance crews. His eyes returned to Derek. And you treated them like obstacles instead of people. The silence afterward felt painfully honest. Derek lowered his gaze for the first time all evening. I pushed too hard, he admitted quietly. Nathaniel nodded once. You led through fear. I was trying to protect standards. Nathaniel looked around the lobby slowly. Fear protects image, he replied. Respect protects people. Somewhere near the ballroom staircase, glasses clinked softly while distant laughter echoed from wealthy investors finishing dessert upstairs. But down in the lobby, nobody seemed to breathe normally anymore. Nathaniel finally glanced toward the torn visitor badge still crushed in Derek's hand. Do you know what the board discussed tonight? Derek shook his head carefully. Nathaniel's voice remained calm. Employee turnover. Complaints. Burnout. Resignation reports. Derek closed his eyes briefly. Nathaniel continued quietly. This company was built by people who cared for one another when nobody was watching. Another pause. I spent 6 months visiting our hotels anonymously because numbers never tell the full story. Derek looked physically smaller now somehow, stripped of the authority he once wore so confidently. Nathaniel studied him silently before speaking one final time. Tomorrow morning, human resources will process your termination. The words came without cruelty. Without satisfaction. That somehow made them heavier. After midnight the Lexington Grand had finally gone quiet. The storm above Manhattan had softened into drifting rain, and silver reflections moved slowly across the towering glass walls surrounding the lobby. Nathaniel Brooks stood alone near the service hallway holding a paper cup of black coffee while the last of the overnight staff finished cleaning. The marble floors. Nobody rushed anymore. Nobody looked afraid. Marcus quietly joked with another bellman beside the entrance, and Emily worked behind the front desk without her shoulders tightening every time footsteps approached. Nathaniel noticed the difference immediately. Fear had disappeared from the building, and somehow the hotel itself seemed warmer. Near the executive lounge hallway, the forgotten mop bucket still rested beside the wall exactly where it had been left earlier that night. Nathaniel walked toward it slowly, loosened his tie slightly, and picked up the mop handle with calm familiarity. Marcus looked over in surprise. Sir, he said softly, you do not have to do that. Nathaniel gave the smallest smile. I know, he replied. He rolled the bucket toward the center fountain where faint rainwater footprints still marked the polished floor. Slowly and carefully, he cleaned them away beneath the warm chandelier light. Several employees stopped working just to watch him. Not because he was their CEO, but because he treated simple work with the same dignity as running an entire company. When the floor finally gleamed again, Nathaniel returned the mop bucket neatly to the service station and glanced once more across the peaceful lobby. Leonard quietly opened the front door for a late-arriving guest, and the guest actually thanked him. Nathaniel noticed that too. A faint smile touched his face before he stepped into the elevator alone. As the doors quietly closed, the Lexington Grand no longer felt cold.